перейдем к докладу Мате Каповича on the reflection of the unaccented length in the short neo-acute in Slavic, the kōkōt type lengthening in Štokavian, Čakavian, and other issues. Об отражении безударной долготы и кратком neo-acute в славянском, удлинение типа kōkōt, штокавском, чакавском и прочие вопросы.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Я тоже буду говорить по-английски. So, yes, I've changed my title a bit, but what it's about is a discussion I'm currently having with kZ�kōt, who you all probably know since 2016 when it started with his short remarks on my book here, kZ�kōt accentuație, and then there was my response and his, and mine and his, and this is the sixth installment in this in our discussion. So we were discussing a number of issues. For instance, the reflection of pre and post-tonic length in Slavic, the lengthening in mobile accentual paradigm C in words like kōkōt, Štokavian kōkōt, reflection of the short neo-acute and Čakavian and Czech Slovak, the genitive plural, ending and accentuation, and some types of words like obrana and the non-etymological acute, old acute there, and Černina type accent here. We also discussed some other things like problem in pre-accentuation, but this is what is currently active, and I will speak only about the first two and a bit about this last one. In my paper, I will speak on other issues as well, but for reasons of space, just this here. So, apart from our differences concerning theories and explanations and different approaches, there are also other problems like ignoring the data and factual problems, because we can't seem to agree on some things which are, I think, just facts and not theories. And also what I've noted is there was some problematic rhetorics which I think only muddle the situation and are not really useful if we aim to a productive academic discussion. So, about pre-tonic and post-tonic length in Slavic. In Proto-Slavic, all vowels except a, o, and to 2 years were actually long, and all of them shortened in some positions in very complex conditions in West Slavic and South Slavic, that is, in languages that have preserved length or traces of Proto-Slavic, Common Slavic length. So you have examples like ronka, hand, arm, with pre-tonic length, and golomb, pigeon, and miesens, month, with post-tonic length. So my view, and more or less some kind of traditional view, is that in South Slavic, both pre-tonic length and post-tonic length are preserved. For instance, in Štokavian, Čakavian, in conservative dialects, you have ruka, and then in Štokavian you have ruka with the stress retraction. And you have golub in exceptional paradigm C, mobile paradigm, and miesets in exceptional paradigm A, thus lengths are preserved. In West Slavic, in Czech you have ruka, which is short, and that was traditionally usually attributed to analogy to forms like accusative singular ruku, where the shortening is expected phonetically. And in exceptional paradigm C, in my view, you have a phonetic shortening in words like holub. But in exceptional paradigm A, what you find is in like half of the examples you have the preserved length, like in miesits, but in some words like pamięć, you have the length is shortened. And I think that the length here is preserved phonetically, but in some cases it's unclear how it shortened. And you can have, I deduce a number of possible explanations about this shortening, but I think it's still rather unclear. I mean, there can be a number of possibilities on how in some of the words the shortening occurred. So how do we know that Czech ruka is an analogy? First of all, it's an uneasy analogy because the shortening is expected in most forms. For instance, if you take a look at the A stems, like ruka, ruki, or for instance, the present tense of essential paradigm C. So in the ruka, where you would expect a phonetic shortening, it's in 17 of 21 examples. Or for instance, in času, I shake. In the present tense, you would expect it, if you take into account like singular, plural, and dual, in 7 of 9 cases, persons. So it's an easy analogy. It's not really problematic. And you have some remnants of the original long reflexes in West Slavic. For instance, in Czech, you have kliti, to curse, mrziti, to die, which is the same, apparently the same length you get in Štokavian and kleti, mrieti. Or you have genitive singular deviti, desiti, from numerals 9 and 10, which correspond to Russian. This is already by Stang, and probably older devyati, deseti in Russian, which doesn't show length but shows the old and stress. So Cortland or Leiden's ontological school has a heterodox view. He thinks that all pre-tonic lengths in mobile essential paradigm C shortened phonetically. So Czech ruka would not be analogical but phonetic, but the problem is that then Štokavian, Čakavian ruka would be analogical. And he thinks that all post-tonic lengths in both the mobile and immobile A and C essential paradigms were preserved, but he has an ad hoc explanation about the pamięć words in Czech, where he says that they just shifted to exceptional paradigm C, which is, I mean, it's possible, but it's a bit ad hoc. So what are the problems with Cortland's hypothesis? The problems are that you have to have a mass reintroduction of length in exceptional paradigm C in Štokavian, Čakavian, and kZ�kōt, and also Slovene to some extent. But there are no forms like ruka or treseš with short vowels are attested anywhere in either Štokavian, kZ�kōt, or Čakavian. So there are no remnants of the supposed shortened forms. And the analogy is not so easy as it is in West Slavic in traditional view, because in Štokavian, for instance, you have a ruka with the supposedly reintroduced length, but you have a genitive plural ruku and dative locative instrumental plural all dual rukama with the short vowel. And in conservative Čakavian dialects, you have treseš with length, but tresemo without it. So you would have, if you want to have the length reintroduced here, secondarily, it would be, you have to explain why it only reintroduces in some, why is it reintroduced only in some conditions. And I mean, the way Cortland does it is he just says, oh, it's reintroduced in disyllabic forms, but not in trisyllabic form and stuff like that. But that's not really convincing, because there's no motivation for that, and it's really difficult. I speak about that in the first 2 installments of in our discussions, and I think if Cortland wants to maintain his hypothesis, he should actually discuss in details his hypothesis, but he doesn't. He just said, "Oh, it's analogical," and that's it. Just he deals with it in one sentence. And this is one of the problems with Cortland, the way he discusses things, and his general modus operandi is that very often he doesn't offer argumentation, even for his own theories, just assertion. So, for instance, discussing in his latest 2020 from this autumn installment in our discussion, he says, when after I was trying to, in like 2 papers, I had like, I don't know, 10 pages on why some analogy is possible or not possible and so on, a detailed discussion. What he does, he just dismisses it in 1 sentence. In fact, there was never an analogical development in Czech. So just an assertion. Or for instance, but pre-Dybō, pre-tonic length was restored in Rūka on the analogy of baritone forms like Rūku. Again, just an assertion, no discussion. So it's as if he has a time machine and he knows the truth, and he just has to tell us the truth. He doesn't have to prove it. And the discussion is often muddled because he deduces some stuff that are completely irrelevant or non-controversial, like this, which I underlined in green. This at a later stage analogy affected forms like glavama, and which became glavama, and that's completely uncontroversial, and there's no reason to point that out. Here's another example of how Cortland engages in discussion. For instance, he says, that means me, Kapović. Kapović does not explain the difference between the accent patterns of Rūka and Truba, C and B. I mean, that's completely ridiculous. It's almost like he's trolling me, because he said that I didn't explain essential paradigm A, B, and C of A stands in Štokavian. And I mean, that's ridiculous, because that's very basic, and that's not really up to that kind of discussion. I mean, I have a whole 50-page article about it, so it's completely ridiculous. Or for instance, he says that I don't explain the difference between short vowels in Malina, Jezik, and Zabava Narod, which is also ridiculous, because in my book I have almost 60 pages about it. So I mean, he can say that he doesn't agree with me, or that my theory is wrong, or that it's not convincing, but he can't really say that I do not explain that, if I wrote more about it, like 10 times more about it than him. So that's really, I think that's not really the way you should discuss, the way you should have a scholarly debate, because if somebody is reading that, somebody who's reading just Cortland's article, he may think that I really didn't touch upon that at all. Length in Čakavian, my or traditional theory, in Štokavian, in forms like tresti, treseš, tresao, potresoh, potrese, tresi. All of these forms would be, and the variant and participle tresen, all of these forms would be phonetically regular. In Cortland's theory, only tresao and potrese would be phonetic, and all others are, and perhaps tresti, which he has a very some strange theories about tresti, about the infinitive, but only these 2 or 3 forms will be phonetic in his view. So this is also one of the problems, because he has to have a lot of analogies, and of course he doesn't discuss it. So it's just no comment. He says it's analogical, and there's no argumentation, no discussion, which is, I think, very problematic. Again, he says in his latest article, Kapović agrees that post-tonic length is preserved in Serbian and Croatian, but not in West Slavic, where post-tonic long vowels are allegedly shortened sometimes in accentual paradigm A and always in accentual paradigm C. And then he says, this is a peculiar opinion. But I mean, this is not an opinion. This is just, the data. How can they actually attest the data be peculiar? I don't actually, what I say is that what we see is that in an accentual paradigm C, apart from a few examples which can easily be secondary, we see always the shortening and accentual paradigm C. In like half of the examples, the length is there, and half of them it's not. I mean, you can say that the data is peculiar, but I think it's very incorrect to say that it's a peculiar opinion, because it's just data. My interpretation is that when you have forms like Czech Vlast and Czech Oblast, which are from the same from the same root, you have a same phonetic process. It's loss of length in unaccented and clinominal words, that is, in words with an initial falling tone. So it's the same process, in my view. In Courtland's interpretation, oblast is phonetic, but oblast is analogical to pretonic position. So you have two different processes, which is not as simple, I think, and these are only partly phonetic. So I think my interpretation again is superior to his in this regard. And now we come to length in West Slavic infinitives with monosyllabic roots, where Courtland's theory says that there should be no pretonic length, not in essential paradigm C. I'm sorry, this is there should be no pretonic length in essential paradigm C in West Slavic, but West Slavic actually doesn't agree with Courtland because you have forms like Czech trasti and so on, which have a long syllable. And in Czech, this is the length is there also in L participles. We have chasl, but in Mrzit you have mrzel, which is short. And you can see that the original difference is in the neo-acute and the original circumflex. You can see it in Čakavian, which has tresel but hmerl. So what Courtland does is that he says that the length this is his article from 2018. He says that the Czech trasti the length was taken from the L participle trust, so it's some kind of very late analogy. But for kliti and mrziti, he said that it stems all the way back to his stage 4/4, which is actually late Balto-Slavic, which I think is very, very strange. And you would have to have the same type of, almost the same type of infinitives to have a completely different origin for their length. So in tresti and in chasti and mrziti, it will have to be different. However, in his last article, he has another explanation. So he says there was another infinitive of Balto-Slavic origin in T. So basically, it's supposed to be this short infinitive with just a year, not an E here. And he thinks that's the way he can explain now Polish rush, trząć, and so on. So he can explain the long vowel by assuming a different ending in the infinitive, but he doesn't really explain why it's there, why we should reconstruct a different infinitive, and he changed his mind from 2019, just 2 years, and it's just ad hoc, and he doesn't say when this infinitive, in what dialects, or in all of Slavic, in what cases, and so on, what infinitive, and so on. And of course, he adds Kapović does not distinguish between the different types of infinitive. And again, this, if an uninitiated reader is reading this, he may think, well, this Kapović, he's a stupid guy, he doesn't understand. There are two types of infinitive. Everybody knows this. He just doesn't understand it, and so on. Again, not really correct. If we take a look at Courtland 2011, this was actually a reply from one of the Robas to Miguel Villanueva Svensson's article. He himself there says the loss of final E in Russian, where stressed E is preserved in dialects, and a similar loss of E in other Slavic languages. So just like 10 years ago, he didn't really understand that there are supposedly two infinitives in Slavic, and even you can see here in 2018, Courtland does not distinguish between different types of infinitive, and in 2020 he distinguishes between the different types of infinitive. So it's very, very strange. And now we come to the thing I find most curious is that the short root that you find in essential paradigm B in conservative West Slavic systems in I and A verbs in the infinitive in essential paradigm B. So in Courtland's view, in essential paradigm B, the length should always be preserved. However, archaic West Slavic does not agree with him, and there is no length in the infinitives of I and A verbs. So you can see here on the right, this is from the Dybă's book from 2000. That, of course, is the material from Lawrence from 1903, where he deduces Slovencian material that even in the 20th century preserved the short root in accentual paradigm B. And here you have from Stankiewicz books from 1993, in his transcription that's a bit more simpler than the phonetic one by Lawrence, and you can actually here see the short stem here, and this material is Slovencian, and of course you have other materials like Old Polish, Old Czech, some Czech dialects, and so on. Some things in Middle Bulgarian. Cortland does not comment at all. Slovencian, for instance, Slovencian I verbs he doesn't mention at all. That's really, really strange. So, what does he comment on? For instance, he says that he doesn't comment at all about the Slovencian I words, but it's just the system. I mean, all old accentual paradigm B infinitives of I verbs in Slovenian have a short root. He does comment on just 3 Old Polish infinitives that were adduced by first Tang and then later by many. Sendic, Šestempić, and Žendač. These are long in present. In modern Polish, you have Sondic and not Sendic. And he has an ad hoc theory that these were not accentual paradigm B. So he says these offer a serious problem for the theory that these words belong to accentual paradigm B, which is, again, it's really strange because, I mean, this Stompiti and Sonditi, these are very clearly and uncontroversially accentual paradigm B. And he has a bizarre theory on Sonditi, which is really strange with some kind of A here in the middle. It's very strange. And Slovencian, he doesn't at all comment on the I verbs. He just comments on two A verbs, Pasati and Dehati, where he says what he implies is that the root in Slovencian is short because originally Pasati and Dehati did not have a long vowel in the infinitive, but he doesn't mention other A verbs and he doesn't mention I verbs at all. Again, no comment. Another thing is the kōkōt type accent in Štokavian, Čakavian. So in Štokavian and Čakavian, you have a systemic and non-facultative nominative accusative singular length on the final syllable in short O and I stems in synchronic accentual paradigm C. So we have words like kōkōt, rooster in O stems, and kokoš, hen in I stem. In my view, this was a change in the Western South Slavic. That means in Slovene, kαϊκavien, Štokavian, Čakavian, where what you have is the length in bog goes to bog, kōkōt, moč, namoč, where you have the shift to the proclitic, and pomoč, help. So in all cases, if you have a word of APC ending in a year, you get the last syllable is lengthened. You don't see that in kαϊκavien and Slovene because they have no phonetic post-tonic length, but in Štokavian, Čakavian, it's clearly there. And this is another issue of theory. This length in kōkōt and kokoš, in mobile accentual paradigm, it's not an issue of theory, it's an issue of facts. So all, for instance, in all descriptions from 19th century to the 21st century, if you take a look at the descriptions of neo-Štokavian standard language, and in all the dialects, you always have this length here. Cortland doesn't think that this length is that this is original because he has a different idea about this bog. He thinks that was already in Common Slavic, which is in my view completely wrong. So he says, but what he does is really strange because he says, in spite of the fact that we always find a short vowel in forms like kōkōt besides kōkōt in the former time. That's just wrong. It's not always, it's never, and it's nowhere, because it's just not attested. I mean, you can have short kōkōt, but it's only in dialects where where there's no phonetic length, whether in general or just partially, or in dialects where in just a few dialects where you can see that it's a very young analogy, like in Čakavian dialect of Vrgada and Štokavian dialect of Dubrovnik, and I've also discussed that at length. He just does not discuss that at all. And he says the lengthening in Serbian Croatian kōkōt was an analogical development. He does not explain what kind of analogy. He just said it's analogical. It's his third paper in a row where he says just in one sentence it's analogical, and he doesn't explain the analogy at all. And he says that did not reach all of the dialects, which is incorrect because it did reach all Čakavian dialects. It's just a matter of fact. It's not theory, it's a fact. And then he says that it's kind of eliminating Polish-Slavic words, which just makes no sense. So again, he muddles the things. He doesn't discuss the details. He doesn't discuss the facts. He doesn't discuss the data. But he just says it's an analogy, and then he adds something to muddle everything up. Again, then Kortland uses examples I had used, and he says in his last article, note that the lengthening in such forms as Serbian Croatian pomoć can easily have arisen on the analogy of forms like pomoć for the power, because I use these examples to prove that it cannot be that the length in pomoć can be something else than what it is in moć and pomoć. But he doesn't say anything about kōkōt, about kokoš, about vladost, about gospod. He says, and he doesn't say, again, it's no comment. Very strange. And the last thing with which I'm finishing is the Černina blackness type accent. This actually has to do with the tone of in long medial syllables in Slavic after Dybos law. So after the accent shifts from the first syllable to the second syllable, do we get the following syllable as stunned thought we should get, or do we get something else? And that, I think what we phonetically get is a neo-acute, and I argue about it in my book and later in my articles, at length, and with a number of new data and from the dialects and so on. And what Kortland does, he doesn't discuss the details at all. The data he doesn't discuss at all. He just said it's clearly analogical. Again, he has a time machine. He knows what the truth is, and we should all accept that he knows what the truth is. He said it's clearly analogical, although it's not clear at all. And another very strange thing, which I don't understand, is he says, confer already Dybō 1968, where supposedly Dybō says that it's clearly analogical. But when you took a look at Dybō 1968, and you have this same thing in 81 and 2000, his books from 81 and 2000, what you have there is Černina with the neo-acute, the same as me, of course, because this was not something I made up. I actually took that from Dybō, and I just added new data and some. I developed his theory a bit with new data and some perhaps new interpretations, but it was not something I made up out of thin air. So I can't really, and of course I referenced Dybō in my book and articles. So I don't really get how he can, reference to Dybō to prove that it's something is clearly analogical, and Dybō does not say that, and I actually, take the whole idea from Dybō and then go further on with it. Again, very strange. Thank you.
Hvala, Mate. Anybody else want to challenge Kapović? Пожалуйста, возражение.
Миша, у Пронка поднята рука.
Что?
Мате.
Поднята рука у Теймана Пронка.
Очень все хорошо, Павел.
Миша, включи микрофон.
Тейман, пожалуйста.
Yeah, Misha, thank you. If you put it like that, who else wants to challenge? Then, of course, I'll happily oblige now. I think, in general, as a bystander, I quite appreciate the discussion between Mate and kZ�kōt. And I think others do as well. Even though it's clear, I think also from the text that they're quite passionate about their own point of view, and I think we've witnessed that here as well. So just two small things, because I think there's a lot of interesting things to discuss here, and also a lot of interesting things that are interesting for the more general other accentologists to have a look at. But one thing is you talk about the length of disyllabic forms in South Slavic, and then of course you mentioned the Štokavian, Čakavian, and kZ�kōt length in forms like ruka. But in Slovenian, of course, there is also a reflex of a short vowel there, right? Which may or may not be secondary. I think in your book you say it's a secondary thing. But at least I think it would be fair to mention that here Slovenian, at least in some forms with a nasal vowel, seems to side with West Slavic rather than with the other South Slavic dialects. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that you say that Kortlandt doesn't explain why you get a secondary introduction of length in, for example, ruka only in the disyllabic forms and not in the trisyllabic forms. But if I understand him correctly, the model for the reintroduction of pretonic length are the words belonging to accent paradigm B. And there you always only find pretonic length in the first pretonic syllable. So if I understand Kortlandt correctly, that's his reason to assume that also only happened in disyllabic words in accent paradigm C. Whether that's correct or not, of course, is another matter, but I think he does actually have an argument why it would only affect disyllabic forms.
Yeah, about Slovene, of course, I mentioned Slovene words like roka and other words like tresti, which have the length. And of course, we have Slovene dialects which are basically the same, like Prekmurje and these dialects in the northwest, which are basically the same as Čakavian. So I do discuss all the examples because, unlike Kortlandt, I actually like to note of all the forms and then just to present. I mean, I never start with with the assertion that I know the truth. What I do is I list all the data, at least all the data I know of, and then I try to find a solution. And often I don't always say that there can be only one solution. For instance, for the Czech thing about the paměť, the shortening paměť, I use like 3 or 4 different solutions because I don't think that, I mean, also Kortlandt solutions might be correct and it works in from my perspective as well, but I think it's a bit ad hoc. So I always use all the forms at least that I know of. So of course I mentioned Slovene roka and but there are other in Slovene. You also have forms like počela and you have forms like tresti, which have the length. But of course you can say that, and you have of course tresesh and so on. But you can say that some of them are illogical. So again, it's different. But of course I mentioned all of them. As goes for this rukama form, that's, I mean, what I object to is that Kortlandt, I mean, he mentions this reintroduction of length for like, I think, at least 50 times in his works, and it's always the same sentence. And I mean, if he doesn't want to explain the in details, I think you should write an article where you explain that in at least 1 page, because I mean, you cannot. These are complex stuff, and I mean, it's not methodologically correct to explain it in 1 sentence. Especially if I write like 3 pages on it or more, where I have serious criticism of it, he should discuss it. And I mean, he doesn't have to agree with what I say, with my theories at all. But if I introduce new material, he should discuss it and try to explain it from his own perspective. I think that would be correct. And what he does, I think that's not correct. If somebody presents new material, he just doesn't want to discuss it at all. I present a lot of new material. He just doesn't even want to try to explain it from his own perspective. He just says, no, that's not correct. This was an analogy in 1 sentence. I mean, that's not a discussion. And for this rukama being supposedly modeled on accentual paradigm B, I don't see how that can be, because in accentual paradigm B you have length. In naroda and zabava, these are his own examples. So you have in trisyllabic forms, you do have length. So I think it doesn't work. And there's another problem because, for instance, even in my model, you have to have reintroduced length, and for instance, in ruke and rukom, in this genitive singular and instrumental singular. But there you can find dialectal data that has a short form there. But for ruka, there's never any short form anywhere, and it's really complex because, for instance, in the present tense of, for instance, tresesh, there's no. where you would expect in Cortland's view a long form, it would be only in the first person singular, which is actually very poorly attested, and in 2 or 3 other forms. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult and unconvincing to say that it's reintroduced. Or if you want to say that it is reintroduced, you should try to explain it a little bit better than just saying, "Oh, it's an analogy," because I mean that's just not a proper way to do scholarship. If you want to convince somebody of something, you have to try to prove it. And if somebody criticizes you, you have to answer to all of their criticisms and not just say, "No, that's clearly analogical." It's not clear at all.
If I may, just on the one thing where you say that the problem is that you never find a length in South Slavic. Well, at least if you ignore the Roka example that you just mentioned. But wouldn't that be, if you try to see it from another point of view, easily explained if you assume that this was a very early analogy? So you don't have to assume that it took place independently in Čakavian, Štokavian, kZ�kōt. It could have taken place only once, but then you would have to assume that it's an early development, right?
I don't think it was independent, but again, it's really strange because, for instance, if you say that this Roka in Slovene that it's that it's phonetic, or if you say that Ruka in Czech is phonetic, you have some examples that show presence of length in both Slovene and Czech. There are some remnants which you can argue that these are remnants of Brytonic length. If you argue what Cortland wants to say that in Čakavian, Štokavian, kZ�kōt, this is secondary, there are no traces of supposedly short roots. And I think even if it were very early, you would have to at least have a couple of positions in some conditions, or in some words you would have to have some random word that just either that generalized the short root or something like that, because I think it would be, even if it were very early, to be unconvincing, and I think it's not convincing that it was so generally introduced everywhere. And I mean, even if you want to claim that, he should explain that in more details. He cannot explain that in like 3rd paper in a row in just one sentence. I think that's really not correct from a scholarly perspective.